I'm Dane Rose. In Lazaris land, in the narrative, the philosophy, the story of Lazaris, pain is certainly not the only way to grow. It's not advisable, right? The goal is to learn to consciously create success, to consciously create fun. Rather than problems, one can have happinesses and joy, and then more happiness and more joy. We don't need problems. We don't need negative emotions. We can have miracles upon miracles upon miracles in an endless process. As the New Age opens, the doors of Syria or Sirius open, the New Age, the new human being. That as long as there is light, we will love you. As long as there is light. And so the direction is strongly up, right? And that is the definition of progress, of success, going up, right? If you desire it, if you expect it, if you imagine it, then you will get it. And if you didn't get it, then you've got payoffs and negative ego. And basically, you get what you want, and what you want is more and more happiness and joy, unless there's something wrong with you. Right? It's not about the world, it's about your payoffs, it's about your negative ego, it's about your beliefs, etc. So unless there's something wrong with you, you have an up and up and up journey with really, right, the only reason for there needing to be any pain or guilt or fear, right, that should have been conquered or ended long ago. The only reason is if you did something wrong, right? So that's the largest thrust, meaning there are counterflows to this kind of dominant flow. Lazaris has done at least as many programs on negativity, but for example, there's never been a program on how to grieve well, right? There's been no embodiment of grief, no weeping, no connecting with the body in any of the events, right? You can talk about certain things, right? But the focus of the Lazaris material is strongly up, right, with detours to deal with our reluctance, to let go of the dark stuff, right? As Lazaris says, give us your pain, give us your anger, give us your shame, let it go, right, so that you can be up. Right? I think that it's a fair summary to say that Lazaris is pointing, the philosophy, the whole purpose in many ways of the material is an ascending relationship. Now, as a teenager, listening to Lazaris talk about these things and, at that point, describe the new age in advance, the millennium in advance, the new doors, the most monumental decade in the history of humanity. Looking at all that, it's a lot to take in. There were, that certainly didn't seem to have much impact on the divorce and trauma unfolding in the family dynamic, right, around me. But maybe I didn't have the right beliefs. Maybe I didn't have high enough expectations, right? Then the family doesn't get divorced. Then the sanity returns. Then the violence stops, right? Because I just didn't imagine it enough. I didn't expect it enough. And I'm now, 48, so, 13, going on 20s and 30s, I still held a certain amount of space that, maybe Lazaris land exists somewhere, right? It just doesn't exist in my world. And I've come to think more recently that Lazaris is wrong, that the approach is unbalanced, that it's fundamentally technically wrong. Now, the word right, the word wrong, we had something called a wheel right, something that someone who would right the wheel, right? That what was wrong, right? What was wrong was an asymmetrical story, an asymmetrical technology, right? That if the wheel was watermelon shaped, it was wrong because it consumed more energy to drive a watermelon-shaped wheel on a wagon, that you would hire a wheelwright to restore the balance, to restore the circle, right? And if you look at grace, right, grace is measured by the efficiency with which energy moves, right? And the sphere is the most graceful shape in existence, right? The sphere, the circle, right? The balanced wheel is the point of grace. Now, the still point, the point of balance is at the center, right? At the center of the possibility field. There is positivity and negativity, heat and cold. All the continuums go out in all directions equally, right? And every continuum has a deep relationship with its opposite, right? Heat and cold are both linked on the temperature continuum. Contraction and expansion are linked on any number of continuums, but certainly the emotional continuum. Right? Up is linked with down. Down is linked with up. Right? You see that in nature. You see that in life. The most incredibly efficient, the most incredibly successful pattern that we know to exist is life itself. Right? The story about life is once upon a time, right? In that mythological terrain that our scientists have faith existed, right? Once upon a time, life was the size of a garden pea, this big. Moments later, right, it had exploded exponentially and exploded and gotten bigger and bigger. And from that very moment, from the first burst, from the first moment of all life, life has been getting bigger, steadily, consistently, moment by moment, expanding. Time has been getting longer, moment by moment. There's more time, right? There is more time now than there has ever been in history. And in a moment, there will be even more time and more time. Right? The universe is getting longer, older, bigger. And as it does so, it becomes more complex. The possibility field expands out in all directions. The probability field, narrower, denser, expands out in all directions. Not just up, right? It expands up and down, right? In and out, right? Pain and pleasure expanding out in all directions. And the actuality, right? What is? The complexity is constantly expanding in life, right? And of course, death leads to life. Life leads to death. No energy is created or destroyed, according to physicists. It simply changes. The death of one shape is the birth of another shape. The energy, the eternal energy, takes an ever-changing array of forms, and as one dies, another is born. They are connected, right? So we have the hyperinflated upper world of Lazaris, and we have, right? We have reality, we have life expanding in all directions, up and down. Now we see it in emotions, right? Falling into deeper love of a child, right? You start in the center point, you fall deeply in love with a child. The child dies, and you fall deeper into grief than you would have if you hadn't loved, right? The more you love, the more you grieve the loss of that love. Now, the loss is inevitable, right? It's built in with the forming, right? The creation, the destruction, they're built in together. When something is created, something else is destroyed, right? And when for something new to be created, that is destroyed. That cycle is innate. The more you love, the more you grieve the loss of that love. The more you care, right? The more painful it is when what you care about is removed, right? So as we move up, we move down. As we move down, we move up. There's a connection, right? And as we move towards grace in many ways, right? As the pendulum swings, right? As it goes further into love, it goes further into the fear of losing that love, right? As it goes further into attachment and the joy of that attachment, it goes further into the grief as that attachment is eventually broken, right? When we expand the wheel an extra 2 inches, and the wheel turns, it eventually goes down an extra 2 inches, and then up again an extra 2 inches, right? As we take a deeper in-breath, we take a deeper out-breath. So in many ways, the Lazaris story is an attempt to ascend without coming down, to inhale without exhaling, right? To have more success without more failure, right? To have more birth, more expansion, more positive energy without negative energy. And yet, obviously, there's a little bit of a problem, right? What's the problem, right? Well, Jach, right, the channel of Lazaris, has not reached escape velocity, right? Has not left orbit of the reality system, right? There's success, there's expansion, there's death, there's failure, right? On a larger scale, right? Elon Musk says it's not very fun to be him a lot of the time, right? That inside there's a storm, right? And he looks to try and harness that storm to create, to innovate. Right? But of course, there's a cost to disrupting other industries, right? Other industries, other car manufacturers, are on their way to bankruptcy. Right? The success, the ascension of Tesla is also, right, the crisis, the financial crisis of traditional automakers that wouldn't make the shift, right? That tried to instead kill Tesla. Now, I think that Lazaris is flat out wrong. And I want to go over the problems that I see in my own life from this ascendance failure narrative. The idea that you just ascend and ascend and ascend if you do your beliefs right and you do your techniques right and you do all those, 7-step processes, that you just ascend, right? And there is no down, right? Not if you're doing it properly. Well, I think the first cost, if we kind of look at the costs and layers of that, the first cost is insanity, right? Because at any point in the last, 50 years, give or take, that Lazaris has been channeling, right? Pain has been expanding in our world. Now, many other positive things have been expanding as well, but pain has been expanding. There are more humans, right? There's more trauma and PTSD. There's more loneliness. There's more fear. Pain, fear, loneliness have been expanding over the last 50 years of Lazaris. Now, it's not just in the plebeian world out there. It's thick. It's thick in the world of Lazaris, right? From the traumatic cycle of shame-based concept synergy employees, right, to the death of Penny with all kinds of medical painkiller complications and unexpected death, right, to the suicide of Michael, right, to the medical issues of Jach and Enrique, the love and loneliness issues. Pain has been expanding this entire time. Pain has been expanding, shame has been expanding, guilt has been expanding, self-pity has been expanding, negative ego, according to Lazaris, how they define it, has been expanding. There is more pain, shame, guilt, self-pity, self-important, righteousness, payoffs, blah, 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 you name it. There's more of it in the world today than there was 50 years ago. And there's more of it than there was 100 years before that, right? Those energies are and have been expanding. Now, in a world where you understand that things expand in all directions simultaneously, the basic shape, right, a sphere, this is not news. But in Lazaris' world, this is something's off, right? Which leads to the next kind of issue, or the problem with this kind of data, which is insanity, right? So Lazaris is when you ask people to interact with a map of reality that does not contain large amounts of the data, you're asking people to go mildly insane, to dissociate from the parts of the data that doesn't support it, right? There is large amounts of data that has nothing to do with the whole Lazaris paradigm. There's nothing to do with what would be predicted by a, quote, successful Lazaris friend. Now, so you ask people to go insane, to subscribe to an asymmetrical map in a symmetrical reality, right? If you look at life and the expansion in all direction, you would predict that there would be more pain, more shame, etc. But you would also predict that there would be more success, more of everything, that there would just be more of it all. because, right, that's how a circle expands, right? In the color wheel, if you take the color wheel and make it wider, it gets darker over here, it gets lighter over here at the same time. There's just more and more shades of color as life expands. So anything that you label has a point on that color spectrum. It's all expanding. More shades of blue, more shades of black, more shades of yellow. Now, the other problem is that to do great art, you actually need, there is a use, meaning life has a use for all that pain. Life has a use for all that shame. Life has a use for all that fear. Life has a use for all that self-pity. It also has a use for all that joy, all that excitement, all that maturity. Life has a use for all of it, right? So you can sidestep a moment and examine the word, the idea of garbage. What is garbage? Well, garbage is something that the person using the word doesn't know what to do with, right? So you can look at life, you can look at the natural ecology, and you can say, the waves pounded in, and part of the cliffs of Dover fell into the waves. The chalk, it eroded. The white cliffs of Dover, some of the chalk fell down, and that lime went into the ocean. And right. Life is always changing. And the question is, does life know what to do with that? Right? Has there ever been a point in life where life didn't know what to do with anything? Right? An island slowly forms out of the waters, and Hawaii is born from volcanic eruptions. Does life say, get this out of here? This is a garbage island? No. Life just waits, and a few million years later, there's all kinds of rich tropical plants growing on Hawaii. Now, as rising sea levels occur and certain cities go underground, does life say, I have no idea what to do with this city? No. Right? Life doesn't have garbage. Life has a constant iterative process of forms from one thing to another, right? That left to its own devices returns to a state of grace, a state of balance, right? This one comes in, a wave goes out there, it comes back, comes back, comes back, comes back to a point of grace. And then something else happens. Unbalances over here, heads over here. But life is never at a loss, right? If the earth blows up with nuclear weapons, will life have something interesting to do with that radiation? Interesting to do with those rocks? Interesting, right? Will the other trillion planets capable of supporting some form of life all vanish suddenly, right? Just because ours did? No. Life has known what to do with every gas, every molecule, every subatomic particle, every human being for eternity. There's never been a single atom that didn't have a useful function somewhere in life. Right? So life doesn't have garbage. So where do we get this idea? Where do we get the word? Where do we get the idea of garbage? Well, we go to the store and we need a bag, right? We go to the store, we need a bag. So it's not garbage, right? We need that bag, right? Please put it in that bag. Okay. We get home, we unpack the stuff, and we can't figure out what to do with that bag. I don't want to carry it back to the store. Well, you could. Yeah, but I don't want to do that. Well, you could turn it into electricity, and yeah, but I don't have one of those. You could you could paint it. Yeah, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't like it. I don't want it. So what do you want to do? Just get rid of it. Meaning, garbage is a human illusion created by people that don't have the imagination to do something with everything that is, right? So humans have garbage feelings. I don't want that feeling. Just get rid of it. Where do you want me to put it? I don't know. Just get rid of it. Right? So life has a use for every mineral, for every this and that. But humans, right? The human identity, the cult identity of today, cannot figure out what to do with rage. Right? So it tries to bury it. It can't figure out what to do with plastic. So we put it in a bin, and then we take it out to the street, and then they dig a big hole in the ground. We can't figure out what to do with stuff that we make. Now, rather than saying this is stuff that we lack the imagination to know what to do with, well, I don't know what to do with it. This is I don't know what to do with. That's what this is, which would be a really useful way of framing it, because if you say, gee, I keep making piles of stuff that I don't know what to do with, you say, well, why don't you think about it? Why don't you think about some things to do about them? I don't want to. I just want to keep creating piles of stuff that I don't know what to do with, and then give it to somebody else, right? They can figure out, right? Because I lack the imagination. I lack the complexity. I lack the intelligence to figure out what to do with my own stuff that we made and wanted, and now I don't want it anymore. I don't know what to do. You give it to this person. No, the cult has programmed people to not want secondhand things, so they don't want it. Right? We'll put it in the cupboard. No, the cupboard's full. Lack of imagination, right? So we just say, okay, let's not call this stuff I don't know how to do with, what to do with. Let's call it garbage. Let's pretend that it's innately bad. And then my problem of a lack of imagination is lost to my awareness, right? It's obscured. I don't know what to do about it, but it's no longer my problem because I call it garbage. Now somebody else has to haul it off somewhere. And then stuff that is undoubtedly good for something, somewhere, right? If you have the intelligence to imagine it, all life is just energy that's turning from one form to another. So if you have the intelligence, if you have the technology, if you have the care, you take what is and you turn it into something better. If you lack that intelligence, if you lack that care, if you lack that attention, you just throw it in a big hole in the ground. And then what do we do with these big holes? I don't know. Keep them away from my house. So we have created, right? Negativity is bad, self-pity is bad, pain is bad, fear is end pain, right? Conquer fear. End guilt. Get rid of self-pity. Get rid of negative ego. Get rid of all this stuff. That's not positive. That's not constructive. Get rid of your destructive thoughts. Get rid of this. Just get it out of there. Move on. Leave it in a hole in the past. Right? So this is the New Age narrative, right? Just forget about it, right? Move on. But life teaches us that there is a constructive right? There is no garbage. No people are garbage people. We do this with garbage people. We create insanity in our people, so they are insane, right? If you tell someone, do what you're told, and then you say, don't eat dessert before dinner, and then, I know best, and then you eat dessert before dinner, right? That was one of my mom's tricks, right? No, you really have to get it. You don't eat dessert before dinner, right? And then you'd find her in the kitchen eating dessert before dinner, right? And how do you process that? Well, a slap, right? Go insane, right? Just don't see what you're seeing, right? And listen to me. I know best. Don't eat dessert before dinner, right? That's how you drive people insane, right? So when you drive people insane, lo and behold, they become insane. And then we say, well, they're crazy. Well, why are they crazy? I don't want to think about that. Those are now garbage people. So we have garbage people, we have garbage feelings, we have garbage thoughts, we have garbage ideas, right? Garbage philosophies. And then we have garbage bags, we have garbage this, garbage that. We have a vast amount of energy that we don't know what to do with. As an American, we will generate 102 tons of garbage, meaning we weigh 100, 200, 300 pounds. And each person in America is going to create 100 tons, 102 tons of stuff in a big hole in the ground somewhere that they didn't know what to do with. Right? So we create garbage because we don't want to deal with what to do with all the energy that at one point or another we wanted. I wanted that plastic container to bring my salsa home. Now I eat the salsa, I don't want the plastic container. Well, what do you do next? Call it garbage and then get it out of my sight. And then complain that, I don't want it anywhere near. So we just lack the ability to understand. Life has a use for volcanoes. It has a use for smoke. It has a use for extinction. It has a use for birth. It has a use for terror. It has a use for trauma. It has a use for healing trauma. It has a use for sociopathic behavior. It has a use for empathic behavior. It has a use for stupid sociopathic behavior. It has a use for highly intelligent sociopathic behavior. Life has a use for it all. But we don't, right? And our cult philosophies that say what the good people are and the bad, we don't have a use for it all, right? In other words, we're not copying the most successful entity consciousness that has ever existed with a track record of winning. Well, what's winning, right? Well, life has been getting bigger, older, more complex, with zero garbage for tens of billions of years from the first time it was born. It's been learning, growing, creating all these different things. It has room for hate. It has room for lions. It has room for zebras. It has room for this, right? And it has a function for all of it. It all ties into the fabric of life, right? But Lazaris says that self-pity is purely negative. Then he backtracks a while later and says, oh, it has this tiny sliver of positivity. If you want to get real with life, you have to say that everything that is has equal value for something in some context, right? Lazaris says judgment and self-pity are anesthetics, right? Life has room for anesthetics, right? There are people that would be insane without anesthetics, right? There's a use for anesthetics, but particularly while you have people in high degrees of insanity and shame and pain, right? Anesthetics are useful, right? There's a use for it all. So what's the next problem in the hurdle of this asymmetrical system? Next problem is shame. So first you go crazy and you say that life should be an endless upward journey into bliss and success with more and more ease. That's what it should be, right? That's what it would be if you were correct, right? If you knew what you were doing. That's what it should be. But it isn't that way, right? It isn't that way. Right? Look at your marriage, look at your car, look at this, look at that, look at this, right? Look at your TV, look at your culture. Now, life has room for lots of pain. Life has room for lots of violence. Life has room for lots of peace, right? There's a peace and violence cycle, right? There's a peace and violence cycle. There's a rise and fall of pork belly commodity cycle, right? There's a lunar cycle, circle, loop. There's an inhale, exhale cycle. There's a rich and poor cycle. There's a rise and fall of nation cycle, right? There's a vitality and energy and draining energy cycle. There's a birth and a death cycle, right? There's a cycle towards wisdom and insight and confusion and overwhelm, right? There's a cycle of hot and cold, right? There are an enormous levels of cycles. Not only that, but we see, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, the more you swing to this side of the cycle, the more you swing to that side of the cycle, right? So you get overwork, then you get chronic fatigue, right? Now, shame, confusion, maybe some guilt, maybe fear of being seen, right, is a natural byproduct of believing the insanity that life should be, could be, if you did the Lazaris techniques, right? If Penny had only done the Lazaris techniques properly, she would have died of natural, pleasant causes rather than a slow demise into pain and codeine and, codeine and vodka happened to put her over the edge, right? So an unexpected rather than one of those graceful deaths. If Penny had just done the Lazaris techniques, none of that would have happened. Right? If Penny had done the Lazaris techniques and given up her shame and she wouldn't have been obese. Right? If Michael had just done the Lazaris techniques and his wife hadn't died a horrible death, then he wouldn't have committed suicide, right? And if Jach had just done the Lazaris techniques, then he wouldn't have had a morbidly obese wife that went off with another guy, right? It would have been wonderful, right? It would have gone from success to more success. If he had just done the Lazaris techniques, they wouldn't have dump-loaded a dumpster full of Lazaris interview books, right? But the Lazaris techniques work, Jach just didn't do them properly. Neither did Penny, neither did Michael, neither did this employee, neither did that employee, right? If Terry Clancy had just done the Lazaris techniques, he wouldn't have been canned, right, in old age, without a big payoff, and he wouldn't have had to sign a non-disclosure to be retired in shame, right? He would have been going out in a fountain of glory with raises and if only the Concept Synergy employees would do the Lazaris techniques, they would all have retirement plans, plus be paid above average rather than below average, right? Plus get better training and wouldn't be shamed for their lack of training, right? But poor Lazaris, right? Here he gives these techniques, there they are. They work wonderfully. It's just nobody does them. Nobody gets it. Nobody understands, right? Lazaris just keeps going on and on for 50 years, but nobody gets it. Nobody understands. Nobody does it, right? Oh, right, But, right, so then there's shame, right? This, oh gosh, I don't want to see how much self-pity I have. I don't want to judge. Oh, I just judged. Oh, that's a bad thing. It numbs things. Well, maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the point, right? There's massive amounts of pain that has a function in a changing cult, right? And maybe you need to numb some of that pain with judgment from time to time. Well, judgment, separate, they freeze. Yeah, that's what ice does, right? When you have pain, right? And you could say, well, wouldn't it be nice if you could have dental work without any pain, right? When they pulled out my tooth, if, it just didn't swell, right? And then you wouldn't need any ice to numb the pain, right? You wouldn't need any judgment to numb the pain, right? But life is not saying this, right? Life has been producing the whole spectrum, right? Why not trust life? That if there is self-pity, there is a function for self-pity. That if there is judgment, there's a function for judgment. If there's criticism, there's a function for criticism. If there's black, there are times when black paint highlights the light. You know, you could go to an artist, of course, and just say, just use gold and yellow. In fact, that's it. Gold. White light. Don't even paint. The canvas is white. That's it. That's it. You don't want to sink unnecessarily. But, of course, right, how do you get those glowing lights and the Kincaid lamps and all that painter of light? Well, it's with all the shadow and darkness on this side here that brings out the light. And all the light brings out the shadow. So reality is going out in all directions. Reality has no garbage. What does that mean? It means that if you're in negative ego, reality has a great use for you. It means that if you're in shame, reality has a use for that. It means that if you're in, right? If you're in guilt, reality has a use for your guilt. Reality has no garbage. That is a human delusion. Right? Now, what does reality do with all this stuff? Like, what does reality do with guilt? It does a whole number of things. One thing reality does with guilt is it calms things down. Like, I feel angry that they said that, but I said that last week. Fuck you, you dumb shit. That's bullshit. I'm angry. You're lying to me. But then I remember, well, I said the same bullshit last week to somebody else. You know, if I'm really going to get angry about it, probably I should look at why I'm doing it, right? And so guilt kind of calms that down. Like, this is outrageous. Did you see this and this and this? Oh, yeah, but there was that time that I did this and this and this. So, you know, I have that response regularly, right? So guilt calms things down a little bit. Well, is there a purpose in life to calm things down a little bit? Is that sometimes a good idea to get calmer? Certainly. How about I'm feeling enraged, I'm feeling angry, right? Does life have a use for anger? Right? Absolutely. Right? Stirs things up. Guilt calms things down. Anger stirs things up. Now, you can try effective communication, and it doesn't work when two people are angry at the same time. You know, you're angry, you say something, it's usually wrong. But life has the use for lots of wrong things. It teaches patience, right? Life has use for inefficiency, right? It teaches frustration. It teaches pain, right? Life has use for pain. It catalyzes change. One of the biggest sources of change is traumatic pain. And it kind of goes like this, right? You're traumatized in childhood, like there's this big explosive energy. It's terrifying. Your ego shatters, right? Your identity breaks, right? It's terrifying, right? And then you recover and you say, never again. I'm never going to feel that way again. I'm not going to let anyone get that close. I'm not going to do this. I'm never going to feel that way again, right? Says the I, right? So it starts to form a defense around and against. I'm not going to do that again, and I'm not going to let anyone get that close to me and all this, right? So we develop our defense, right? And pretty soon all number of things just can't happen. We're not growing or changing, right? But then life comes along and traumatizes us again, right? So all our defenses get shattered. We realize they weren't all that ready, right? And then we change. Why? Because we realize that even though we built up that great defense, it didn't protect us from trauma. So we might as well do some training. Like if we're going to be hit and bounced around anyway, why not go for it, right? And so we go for it, right? So life has a use for that second trauma, right? Life has a use for everything. Every single thing that anyone has ever done, thought, and said, life has a use for. But as simplistic cult members, right, of a psychologically illiterate cult, we don't have uses for this. Oh my gosh, they're a negative ego. What should I do? You don't know what to do you, right? Life has a use for that. Maybe the use is to see the negative ego inside. Maybe the use is to cheer them up. Maybe the use is to teach them more skills so that they're not in so much terror. There's tons and tons of useful things to do with all kinds of things, right? I feel this violent rage coming up. Oh, that's bad. I don't know what to do with that. Well, life has a use for that. Right? Go out for a run. Make some major changes in life, right? Learn, understand from it. And if you hit someone with that rage, that's a use too, right? Life has a use for that. God, I'm going to punch the shit out of them. Okay, you do that. Now, what use does that have? Well, maybe they learn that tormenting you passively aggressively, right, for 10 years in a row, and then blaming you for that leads to being punched out with people that don't know what they're doing. Right? Meaning if you're too dumb to recognize that I'm emotionally immature and out of sync with myself, if you're too dumb to see that, and so you do your little torment punishment thing, and it all bottles up, and you're too dumb to see that, and then eventually you get punched out. Well, life has a use for that. Like, gee, maybe I have to find some other way of dealing with my emotions than tormenting those close to me, particularly the people that don't know what they're doing and can't channel their emotions. Or maybe I'd teach them to deal with their emotions so that when I punish them, they have, they can let it go in another way, right? Life has a use for it all. It's all useful. Grief, right? There's never been a 5-day event at Lazaris where people grieve and wail and move their bodies and go into the state and move through it, right? Well, if there was, life has a use for that. Now, of course, life has a use for Lazaris events, right? Life has a use for this video. Like, how can you have space for a video that criticizes aspects of Lazaris if Lazaris is perfect, right? So life has a use for an imperfect Lazaris. And life has a use for criticizing an imperfect Lazaris. Life also has a use for covering that up and defending against it. No, my whole world will fall apart if Lazaris isn't perfect, right? So there's a bad person, right? And there's a use for that, right? Meaning if I'm too dumb to understand that much of our culture is children in grown bodies that cannot stand the idea that their authority figure isn't perfect because they're depending on that authority figure to rescue them eventually, right? Then I'm too dumb, right? Because I get slapped in the face by people who are all upset that their perfection is shattered, right? Now they have to grow up. Right? So why did I do it? Right? I could have been enjoying dinner with my wife. Why did I have to upset all these people? Right? Life has a use for the upset, and life has a use for learning about the upset. Life has a use for all of it in all directions. Now I find myself, the starting point for this is I've been feeling sorrow and I've been feeling grief the past 10 years and no idea what it's about or where it's going. I've run like hell from it. What's wrong? What am I doing wrong? Why am I feeling sorrow and grief? Why am I feeling sorrow and grief? Why am I feeling sorrow and grief? I'm doing something wrong. Bullshit, right? Bullshit. If you don't feel sorrow and grief, where's your thread to get back in sync in a sociopathic culture, right? It cuts you up into little bits and then throws you out to be eaten by birds and wolves, right? Where do you find those pieces of yourself and get them back without sorrow and grief to point out that, right, a death has occurred, right? You've been slaughtered and cut up into pieces, right, and thrown to the wolves. You're supposed to feel happy about that? How does the reassembly begin without all that sorrow and grief? It doesn't. How does the compassion for the younger generation that's being cut up right now, how does that form without understanding the pain and the grief of being cut up into pieces? Right? How do you feel compassion? How do you feel empathy? How do you feel anything useful if you haven't been cut up into pieces and thrown to the wolves? Right? How do you learn discernment if everyone is trustworthy? Right? The kid just thinks it's all right, everything's great. You want to do this, do this. Grandfather wants to masturbate his little granddaughter, and everyone says, look how much your grandfather loves you, and this and that. And like, how do you figure out something's wrong if everyone does the right thing all the time? Right? How do you learn to take care of yourself if everyone takes care of you well all the time? I didn't want to learn how to take care of myself. Forget it. Been waiting endlessly. Please, take care of me. You, anyone? Oh gosh, I'm going to have to learn why, right? So a sociopathic world, I'm not going to take care of you. I'm not going to take care of you. That's sociopathic, right? I need someone to take care of me. Yeah, but I'm not going to. Go fuck yourself. Oh, gosh. I guess I'm going to have to take care of myself. Right? That doesn't happen, right? And this is why I say there's some down eddies to this constant positive trait. Lazaris says you don't grow up unless you're betrayed, right? If Lazaris wasn't full of shit, then you just go back and listen to a Lazaris tape, whether it works or not, right? But if you look at it and you say, bullshit, this makes no sense, well, then you have to start thinking. Then what's the benefit? You actually become an adult, a spiritual adult, not a spiritual dependent. But Lazaris said this and this and this, right? That also, I hated it. Can't tell you how angry, how scared I've been at looking at the shithole, right? That is the Lazaris community, that is the Lazaris material, that is the concept synergy saga, the whole shitty thing, my life included. And saying this is the highest resonance that's ever going to touch the planet. God, I want out of here. Oh, God. What, But Lazaris said this, and Lazaris said that. He said he was the most luminous being to ever touch. He said this, right? But it's shit. It's shit. Right? What? I don't know what to do. Like you think I had role models, right? You think my parents were some great example of that's what to do, right? Or my siblings, right? Depressed, right? Bipolar, this, that, I don't know what the fuck to do. Right? Please, Lazaris, come up with something. Come up with something that works, right? But you have to grow up. And I think a lot of the growing, the up that seems useful is like grief. Grief is the single most valuable feeling that I'm feeling these days. I wake up feeling absolutely terrible. It's terrified, anxious, tense muscles. I wake up feeling terrible. Critical, scared, I didn't do it, it's not my fault, all this stuff. And then I feel, if I pay attention, I can't move that energy, by the way. But if I pay attention, I go down into a grief, and it's like, oh my God, I can't deal with this. I can't feel this. It's like this black wave. I can't move. Get it away from me. Right? This isn't the positive energy Lazaris is talking about. It's fucking heavy. It's filled with grief. I can barely move. Can't barely lift my eyes. I can barely write. It's too much, right? Well, sometimes I take a microdose of mushrooms to manage, right? Because it's just too fucking much, because I've been avoiding it too long, right? Because I'm trying to go up, right? I'm trying to get that world Lazaris is talking about. Trying to go up. And to be a winner, living life, conscious success. This doesn't feel like success. Who wants to feel this horrible feeling, right? But then I discovered something. If I sit at the doorway of grief, right, if I sit at the doorway of grief, I go through the portal. To what? What is born on the other side of what I'm grieving? I'm grieving a lot of beautiful things that didn't happen, that went wrong, that went this. There's a shit, and I want to hang on to those. Like, please, maybe one day they'll change their mind and come back and say this instead of that horrible thing that they said. Please, I don't want to just let it go. And am I just giving up to, there's never going to be anything that good, and it's just, it's just so shitty. Right. It takes and see, the trouble with Lazaris's paradigm is I wasn't expecting to find anything good on the other side. Right. Now, Lazaris has said a few little hints that suggest that it can flip from this into that, but as I said, Lazaris has never done a good grief workshop, and there's too much pollutants in this overinflation of good stuff. So so I sit with this horrible grief, and I feel like it's just going to go on forever, and I try to avoid it and do this, and I've been doing this for years, not knowing what I'm doing. Then I sit with it, and then there's all this joy on the other side. It's like, of course, that grief was the most valuable thing as a doorway to its other side of the continuum, right? Of course, right? So I would say that a good life has 50% death and 50% birth, which is 50% grieving or celebrating what is dying, and 50% grieving or celebrating what is born, right? It has great love and great fear of losing that love. It has lights and it has dark colors. It has anger and it has calm, right? It has reactive, they did it, and it has guilt, like, oh gosh. It has, right, this is what I need to do for me, and it has shame. Yeah, but that isn't the best thing for you. I get that. You're not ready for me to move on. This is the best thing for me, right? To be shameless is to not acknowledge the fact that what I'm doing is not best for you. You're scared. You don't understand it. You don't like it. It's not your preference. You're terrified. But it's the right thing for me, right? So there's the joy and the shame, right? The possibility field goes out equally in all directions, right? There's responsibility and there's self-pity. You go tell a 5-year-old that it's their fault, right? That they didn't get out of the way because their parents ran over them and poisoned them with this, right? Go fuck yourself. You're dumb, right? Right. 5-year-old inner regressed 5-year-old or outer 5-year-old is going to feel what they should feel, which is self-pity. That's what they should be doing. And life has a place for that. And self-importance, after feeling shame-based and small and worthless and and then you find some little thing that, oh, I'm the most important thing in the world. Life has a place for that too. Right? Life has a place for that grandiosity as an antidote to shame. And life has a place for being knocked down from that grandiosity and having to then find some more permanent way to hold one's center. Life has a place for all of it. Right? Life has a place for the more. Life has a place for the lesser. Life has a place for bullshit. Life has a place for sincerity. Life has a place for insensitive humor. Life has a place for sensitive humor, and life has a place for seriousness. Life has a place for all that is ecological, that becomes whole, that moves towards grace, that's all one, that's all part of God got us all that is, right? Life has a place for Lucifer, right? The one that wanted God to be better than he was, the one that didn't want to let God do this and that, right? Life has a place for martyrs, right? If you look at any decent place in the cult, regardless of what Lazaris' brainwashing is all about, right? Martin Luther King has had an impact with that martyrhood, right? Gandhi, right? You think walking up and down, carrying bits of salt on your head, being beaten, you think that's fun? Right? Going through suffering and enduring that liberated India. Right? Now, you could say, no, they should have done it differently. Go fuck yourself. Go do it differently yourself. But life has a place for everything that is. And as long as it is, as it is, and as long as isness is, it will have a place for it. It will have a place for your arrogance that you know you're right and I'm wrong. It has a place for my arrogance, right? I know all this is perfectly rational, blah, 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 right? Life has a place for all that. It has a place for the mocking person who's criticizing and will never say it in person, right? You have a place for that. It's all part of life. So we can learn as we become more conscious to move towards symmetry and balance for us. But I think it's reasonable to not go crazy, to not shame ourselves, to not feel that somehow we're wrong because we found love, that if we hadn't found it, we wouldn't have lost it. We love more deeply, that if we didn't love more deeply, we wouldn't have feared its loss more deeply, right? We cared more, and so we're enraged when what we care is violated, right? It's all part of it. If you don't care, you won't be enraged by, the world stepping all over it. Very simple, right? If you don't want to swing left, don't swing right. And then you're basically just saying, I don't want life to exist. Life exists as an expanding possibility into deeper and deeper cruelty, deeper and deeper magnificence, deeper and deeper sensitivity, deeper and deeper brutality, deeper and deeper darkness, deeper and deeper light, right? And life has a use for all of it. It all has a place, a function. We don't have a place for all of it. But this is where I would say that Buddhism is a more useful map than Lazarism, right? The pursuit of endless happiness and joy. And then sounds great as a kind of a bypass of, gosh, I don't want to deal with those feelings. Right? And then there are those Zen monks that are kind of in laughter and joy and just don't care a lot of the time. Right? They're not very useful in building your car. They don't fix your plumbing very reliably. But they laugh and see the nonsense of the world, and people feel joy with them, and life has a place for them too. Right? Life has a place for the martyred car mechanic that's girlfriend is going to kill him because they're late, but they got your car fixed. Right? And life has a place for the Person with a great relationship, you know, who leaves their customer and said, no, I said I'd be back at 6 o'clock and this car is not fixed yet. You're just going to have to wait for me next week. I don't have any more time with you. And the 1-star reviews, and life is a place for that too. Take care.